This video was brought to you by the Fabulous app. Today, I want to share with you 6 simple reasons why you just can't seem to get on top of your clutter. And I gotta say, I think the last one, number 6, really impacted my life once I realized it or understood it. So if this topic interests you, I'd encourage you to stick around to the end of the video. The first reason it might feel like you can't get on top of your clutter is that you don't have the time. I feel like, especially here in the US, there is a culture of keeping busy, of working a full-time job, maybe multiple jobs, of staying active, of having a hobby, having a social life, keeping your schedule tightly booked. There's just such a culture of go, go, go. And I think it can be really overwhelming and hard to navigate. And then if we want to be able to declutter, we do need time and space in our schedule and in our lives, and even just the energy to get that done. Because it's not always easy. Sometimes it's really challenging, both physically and logistically, figuring out how or where you're going to get rid of the stuff, but also emotionally. Sometimes it feels like this very big emotional burden, especially when we're going through stuff that maybe has some kind of sentimental value, or maybe even more simply, getting rid of stuff is stressful in some way. And so I think finding the time and the space and the energy in our lives to do that in today's society can be so difficult, especially with social media, where it kind of feels like everyone's keeping tabs on everyone at all times. It's hard to set aside that time, but it does require some intentional thinking and problem solving in order to fit it in. For me, it's a combination of setting aside big chunks of time and little chunks of time. So, having maybe a whole day Saturday or a whole Saturday morning devoted to decluttering, but then also sprinkling in little 10, 20-minute declutters here and there. And I'll admit, there are sometimes periods of time when I'm not on top of it and it kind of goes to the wayside, full transparency. But I think that making sure that we get back on track and getting back on the horse once we've fallen off is a huge piece of that. We really can't fall into traps of all or nothing thinking like, if I didn't have time this month, it's never going to happen. It's important to realize sometimes there are ebbs and flows in how busy we are, and we need to take advantage of those ebbs and try to fit in the decluttering where we can. And we don't have to be perfect about it. Related to this topic of navigating really busy lives, I want to talk about the sponsor of this video, the Fabulous app. The Fabulous app is basically this digital coach that helps you achieve your goals in life. I personally find it difficult to stick to new habits, so I think it's cool that this app is based on research done by Duke University scientists. There are 2 approaches that it takes. One is habit tracking, where you can pick among more than 100 recommended habits or create your own. And then there are dedicated behavior change programs designed specifically to help you achieve your well-being goals. I've noticed that the app is incredibly innovative at getting me motivated. Like, it has these fun, engaging ways to get me doing the things that I want to be doing. So if you want to start building your ideal daily routine, which might even involve some decluttering, because they do have some decluttering challenges on this app, then check out the link in the description box below. The first 100 people to use that link will get 25% off a Fabulous subscription. If you're trying to make some kind of change in your life, the Fabulous app is a great way to do it, so check it out. Okay, back to the rest of the video. The second reason you can't seem to stay on top of your clutter is that stuff breeds more stuff. And I actually want to read you a comment that someone recently made on one of my videos. It says, "It drives me crazy when I find myself buying things because of other things I bought. The girl needs a cover, the exercise machine needs a fan, etc." Ugh. And I totally agree with this. It's like so often when we buy something, you need to buy something else. It's like those kids' books. If you give a mouse a cookie or if you give a moose a muffin, once you break into starting with something, it can just evolve into something else. If you buy some new tools, then you need maybe a case for those tools. Or if you buy a bunch of new books, then you need a whole new bookshelf. If you buy a new shirt that requires an undershirt, then you have to get that. And it goes on and on and on. And so I think it's helpful before you buy something to consider the rippling effects that that object might have. Will I have to buy anything more in order for this object to function? What will that include? How much will it cost? Do I want all that stuff in my life? is it really worth it for me? Now, sometimes it might be, but I think it's easy for us to continue to accumulate once we get something. And sometimes it's not only just because we need something in order for that thing to function, but it might also be like we're used to purchasing things. Like I've noticed if I get into a habit of purchasing, it just feels easier to keep purchasing more stuff, which actually makes no sense. It's actually like if I've purchased something, I should probably buy less in the future. But somehow, once I kind of open that floodgate, I just keep doing it. And so I think stuff just inherently breeds more stuff, either because it requires us to buy something more for that object to function in its best capacity, or because we just get used to buying and having that as part of our routine or our lifestyle. A third reason is fear based attachment to objects. I think sometimes we develop these attachments to our belongings and we don't realize how much of it is actually fear based. We're afraid for the future and what the future might hold, and that at some point we might either miss this belonging or that we might really need it and we no longer have it, or maybe we fear future guilt for getting rid of it. Maybe we fear somebody else asking about whether we still have the object they gave us. Maybe it's also just fear about the stress of having to figure out how to get rid of it. There are lots of different ways that we relate to our objects in emotional ways, more so than I think we tend to realize. And I think even more specifically, quite often why we keep things is actually related to fear and anxiety. It's that kind of stressed out feeling we sometimes get when we declutter. It's like, oh, will I regret getting rid of this object? And I think a lot of it ultimately comes down to that core emotion of fear. As research shows, the best way to actually overcome fear and anxiety is through exposure. By doing something more, we get more accustomed to it. We don't feel as anxious about it, and it becomes easier. It's like think back to the first time you drove a car. How scary was that? How overwhelming? I remember when I first started trying to drive, it felt like I would never be able to. It just felt so unmanageably difficult. Whereas now I drive without thinking much at all. And so I think that it's a similar phenomenon with any new task or challenge we face. The more we do it, the more we grow accustomed to it, and the more we can handle those fears. And I think the more we declutter and realize that not only does our quality of life not worsen because we let go of these things, but it actually improves, then it just becomes easier and easier. But sometimes if we don't really face that fear head on, it can keep creeping up on us. And then we're stuck with more stuff. So I just encourage you to think about how fear plays into your decluttering journey. A fourth reason we can't stay on top of our clutter is societal expectation. Our whole society, at least here in the US, I think is built around stuff. And I think we see it in advertising, but I think we also see it even in our individual relationships with people. I actually had a recent video where I talked about minimalism and stuff and system psychology that's related to this. If you're interested, I'll link it up here. Often, how we relate to people is via stuff, whether it be through gifts or through more subtle forms of stuff impacting our relationships. I think quite often there are implicit messages being sent by other people in our lives by what they wear, by what they promote, what belongings they talk about a lot. And I think that our stuff can get really entangled in our relationships and in how we navigate this world and relate to each other. So I think there are these bigger societal, maybe capitalistic forces that encourage us to spend and to buy and to collect. But I also think that there are more subtle forms of society impacting us and sort of by our like individual relationships with people and the people closest to us. Sometimes the people closest to us actually end up being the ones who encourage us to collect the most. It's kind of like this is like a very weird metaphor or comparison, but it's kind of like how, you hear how in murders, statistically, it's more likely it's someone close to the murder victim that murdered them. Well, I think our relationship with stuff is also probably most impacted by the people closest to us. So, yes, society impacts us and sends us these messages about stuff, but I also think it's those close friends, those close family members that impact how we feel about belongings and impact us to want to be motivated to buy more stuff. And so I think being aware of how those people in our lives impact us and our relationship to our stuff can be really helpful in helping us gain more control over our collecting habits. A fifth reason you might not be able to stay on top of your clutter is that you haven't clarified your why for pursuing minimalism. And I know this one goes back to basics. I talk about this a lot. A lot of other minimalism people talk about this a lot. But I think remembering to clarify why you're doing this is so important, and to really clarify specifics about how having less would impact your life. Like, if I had less, X, Y, or Z would happen. Like, if I had less, I would feel an overall sense of lower stress and more contentment. Or if I had less, I would have more time to spend with my family. Or if I had less, I'd have more time and energy to put into this or that passion of mine. And there might be a couple of reasons involved, but I think clarifying that motivator is so important, and regularly checking back in with that reason and remembering that why as you're doing declutters can be really helpful. I think sometimes it feels so obvious as to why having less might impact our lives that we don't take the time to think about it. A sixth reason why you might not be able to stay on top of your clutter is one that has really impacted my life personally, and I think allowed me to just open up what I was doing into getting rid of more and into really wholeheartedly pursuing minimalism. And that reason is a deep down lack of confidence in your ability to change. I think I approached declutters without much energy, without much gusto in the past, because deep down, I didn't think I could really do it. I thought that I had such an attachment to my stuff, that I had such a history of being kind of messy and just having a little bit too much or a lot too much, that it just wasn't in the cards for me. And I don't even know if I explicitly thought about that. Like, I don't think I can do this. It was more of an implicit process. But once I realized that that was happening for me, once I recognized that I had that lack of confidence in my ability to actually get rid of enough stuff for it to impact my life, everything changed for me. Once I realized I could do this, also that I didn't have to be perfect about it, that I could just take one step at a time and see where that took me, I was able to just get that momentum that I needed to do more. And I think for me, part of it was also starting this YouTube channel and keeping that momentum going in other ways. But I think it took that initial realization that, hey, I'm not believing in myself, but I'm letting these thoughts that aren't totally accurate, these thoughts that just kind of popped into my head about my limitations, keep me from achieving what I really want to achieve. And I realized that deep down somewhere, I had the capacity as a human to change. And that's one thing I got to say, having worked as a therapist for people for years, people can change. And it really comes down to, I think, just a little bit of confidence. You don't have to have a lot. It might just be a little bit. You might still have some self doubts, but believing in your own human capacity to grow and to evolve as a person, I think is so impactful. I think sometimes our society forces us to create these identities, but sometimes identities create boxes for ourselves, like I'm a messy person or I am a collector. I think sometimes those can be very limiting. But if we recognize that we can change those identities, that they can evolve, and that we can grow, and that maybe you can even develop a new identity, that maybe you're somebody who likes to live with less, I think then we can take those big strides in making real, tangible changes in our lives. I'd encourage you right now, whatever stage you're in, whether you're just getting started, whether you've tried decluttering and it just hasn't worked in the past, whether you're a true declutterer, but you're just feeling a little bit stuck, pay attention to where you're at in your confidence level. On a scale from 0 to 10, how confident are you that you can make a big change in how much stuff you have? Just think for a second, from 0 to 10, where are you in that scale? I'll give you a second to think about that. Really evaluate, where do you think you're at? Now, ask yourself the question, even if you're like a 1 or a 2, why was that a 1 or a 2 and not a 0? There's probably a reason. There's probably part of you that knows that you can do this if you really want to and if you really set your mind to it. Why is it that you feel that you have a little bit of confidence that you could make that change? And really focus on that part of yourself. How can you bolster that confidence? How can you bolster the reason as to why you thought you might be able to? And build off of that. So hopefully some of these reasons got you thinking about how clutter develops in your own life so that you can better tackle it in the future. But just remember, this is all a process and we don't have to be perfect on every step along the way. Let me know if any of you have thoughts about how clutter builds up in our homes or strategies you use to overcome it. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Aylin. And on this channel, I talk about simple living, intentional living, minimalism, and building an empowering mindset. If any of those topics interest you, I've got a bunch of bingeable content, so feel free to subscribe below. And if you ended up enjoying this video, please hit the thumbs up button. Doing that, taking that moment to just hit that thumbs up makes a huge difference on my channel. So if you're willing to do that, I would really appreciate it. And that's really all I've got for you. Thanks so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.